À cette table, donc,
Who have we today with us? Well, seated side by side, in addition to a lady representing France, there's a Palestinian, an Israeli, and a Lebanese sitting at the same table. I suppose that you easily imagine that such a thing, such a gathering, is not easy. For instance, my country says that I should have no contact with Israelis, so if I can call it this way, an outlaw. It's not easy, not just for legal reasons, but for emotional reasons. It's such a brutal history that we share that connects us. So many things that we have up our throats for the three countries. So many people who died, so many territories invaded, occupied, so much violence, so much hatred, that being at the same table, being sat here, is a choice. But as the character said from Le Monde de l'Orient, this is the way. This is the way. It's the way. It's the only way we could follow if we want to arrive at peace, is to sit with the enemies and to talk. But peace requires language and needs language. Thus, it was quite obvious, and I'm saying this for those who've come today to listen to us without really knowing what it's all about, if perhaps the theme was interesting, well, this belongs to a series of lectures on writing. We've reached the 4th lecture on writing. I've been treading my own path. I've been writing novels and theatre plays, and the question of resolution of conflicts, or the impossibility thereof, should be at the crossroads with the process of writing, because this is my job. This is where it really is at the crossroads. Well, the question we'll ask ourselves today follows the lecture I've just given, which is, what can diplomacy still do today? How can the mass media, or through the media, through the news, we have the impression that no diplomacy can arrive at anything. So if we look at those who do things from within, the diplomats, those who work in the shadows, what would they say? Should the language of diplomacy change and adapt today, when language, through lies, has become a tool, a stated tool, a weapon that's used openly in the struggle that exists between the nations? Could we say that truth should be at the heart of diplomacy, or, on the contrary, should it change? Now, for this seminar, how can I say? It's a pleasure. It's not the best word I could find, a pleasure. But symbolically, this is a very important moment to have the three speakers we have today side by side to continue this conversation. To my left, Anne-Claire Legendre, who's the advisor to the French presidency for anything that deals with the MENA region, North Africa and the Middle East. Then Mr. Ehud Olmert, who formerly was Prime Minister of Israel between 2006 and 2009. And to his left, Mr. Nasser Al-Kidwa, who was Minister for Foreign Affairs for the Palestinian National Authority in 2005. Now, what we're going to do today for our seminar is as follows. I'll hand over to the three speakers. They'll be given 20 minutes, and then they'll be able to react to what the other speakers will say. And we will start with Anne-Claire Legendre, because we would like to listen to the one whose guts, if I can use the expression, are not exactly in the Middle East, even though she works for and on the Middle East day in, day out. So it's an external eye that we cast on this history. She's been working on that every day. She speaks Arabic. She knows the region. That's her job. We'll listen to her first. And then Mr. Olmert will be the next speaker. He's going to be talking for 20 minutes. And then Mr. Al-Kidwa will be speaking third. And Claire Legendre, the floor is yours. Well, thank you very much. Mr. Mouawad, thank you very much. It really is an honor for me to be talking about diplomacy, to talk about the Middle East side by side with Prime Minister Mr. Olmert and Minister Al-Kidwa, who were the main stakeholders in the writing of this history. And they still are. Oh, can you hear me? Right. With an initiative that they will be unveiling soon. Should I be speaking English or French, Wajdi? So, I'd prepared everything in English, but anyway, I'll be speaking French. I'll try and use the microphone properly, and I'll be speaking French. Wajdi was talking about language and the links between language and diplomacy. Can I start with something and tell you more about the tools that we use? What is the toolbox used by the diplomats in a world such as ours? What about mediation in conflict areas, which is the title of the seminar that you're attending today? Reconciliation is a word that's too ambitious. What we do, we the diplomats in the Middle East, is to work to put an end to violence. We're not even talking about peace. We're talking about stopping violence with different levels. A ceasefire, stopping hostilities, which is what we saw recently in Lebanon. And it can also mean a truce, a pause for humanitarian organizations. And it's very difficult to have a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. What are the conditions to arrive at a stop in hostilities? Well, the objective is to rebuild a minimum level of trust between the parties. And if we want to go from truce to a ceasefire to stopping hostilities and perhaps later on, eventually, to peace, we have to make sure that we can develop trust in a lasting way. And to do this, we're equipped with tools, we the diplomats. To start with, international law that we can use. International law is a very specific type of law. It's a law which we could call soft law because it lays down the principles whereby the states will have to abide by these laws. It's based on the state's sovereignty. Nothing is imposed on the states except for the rules that they decided to apply on purpose. What's specific of this soft law, and that's why it's difficult, is that we don't have any international authority that would make sure that people follow this soft law. So the second element that diplomats have to use is the reality of what's happening on the ground, and reality is stubborn. The reality is that of a struggle. And therefore, if we want negotiations to succeed, the objective is to find the right balance between this struggle, this arm twisting that happens on the ground, and the principles of international law for the accord or agreement to be just. And of course, it should be seen as something fair and lasting for the weakest of the parties, but also for the strongest of the parties, and should be seen as the best possible accord or agreement that could be concluded. Let me give you an example. Today, if we look at Ukraine, the proposal put forward in terms of peace today poses a question, which is that of security guarantees. And the question is how lasting will the agreement be? Peace makes sense only if it lasts. So one of the dimensions to take into account is at the heart of these current negotiations. For this, trust is key. It is key for the negotiators. As you know, in the Middle East, and as far as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, the Americans are at the heart of the negotiations, and they're usually seen as honest brokers. The expression was said in English, the honest brokers, the middle persons who have to represent both parties and their interests. Trust is at the heart of what we do as diplomats. You might remember that we're talking, or we're using expressions like letters of dolences, for instance, and these letters, these credentials might mean this, that is, you can trust the person who's going to be talking to you, what they're going to say on behalf of the heads of states. But as you were saying, Wajdi, the question of lies is something we always discuss. And it makes the whole situation more complicated. We saw this emergence of misinformation and disinformation, a technology which translates the desire of some stakeholders not to abide by the rules, not to be in good faith, and to use lies so that they don't have to work on the truth. For us, the negotiators, it makes our job even more complicated because these are like quicksands, and we are with different stakeholders who are going to say something that's not grounded on anything that's close to reality. And yet we have to find the common ground on which we'll be able to negotiate. And this is why, for instance, the United Nations are a body that some people don't like, because that was their role. In the case of some conflicts, their role was to produce an objective report, thanks to which we would have a baseline from which we could negotiate. So the possibility of an alternative reality would make this negotiation even more complicated. In the previous seminars or lectures that you gave, I was struck by the fact that you talked about diplomacy, Wajdi, and I think that's quite interesting because our job aims at fighting against powerlessness. And this makes me think of what Michel Cassé was saying, the astrophysician, who was saying that entropy and disorder continues to grow in the universe. And what's striking today for the spectators, the onlookers, the ones who are looking at geopolitical relations today, is that disorder, it seems, is growing throughout the planet and the world, is growing everywhere. And this goes against some of our beliefs or theories that were born when the USSR collapsed, whereby the arrow of progress would lead us to the victory of liberal democracy and a form of peace and prosperity, that the European Union was the model, of which the EU was the model. Yet today it's different. We've entered the 21st century, a century which is multipolar, much more fragmented than it was in the past, because American might and power is expressed differently. Other powers emerged, and this fragmentation leads to more conflicts. And thus, the world is more brutal. In addition, we've seen that some players want to challenge the very international order that was founded in 1945. And they also aim at challenging democracy that you were talking about, which is like the foundations of our societies. So one might feel we're totally at a loss, or there's powerlessness. What can we do to fight against powerlessness? Well, for diplomats, there are two attitudes that we can take, two behaviors, which is connected to mythology, which is dear to your heart, Wajdi, which is we're Sisyphus and Cassandras. Sisyphus, why? Because diplomacy is something that you have to start and start again. The development of international law is something which is done through thin layers and repetition. If you look at climate negotiations, for instance, each year we come back to the negotiation table. Therefore, the progress we see is far, far from being sufficient. It's too slow. But without these rounds of discussions, there would be no rules today to regulate climate and biodiversity. So Sisyphus, never to give up. And to stick to your ideals that we're trying to build thanks to consensus is something we always have to remember. Now, people say, okay, it's only words, words, words. But this is how law is developed. It's based on a consensus which is developing little by little at the level of the United Nations and elsewhere in an iterative process. We are also the Cassandras. Just like the climate experts, we are the Cassandras because Our objective is to make sure that we look ahead, we make predictions, because we don't want to be at a loss or powerless when we prepare the future. So what we do as diplomats is that we analyze international changes. And these changes don't happen suddenly. It seems that when they happen, they are brutal if you look at them from outside. But in the longer run, these are dynamics that we need to identify very early. And today, we're saying that Europe is waking up in the field of defense in the light of other dynamics that we saw elsewhere. But these dynamics had started a long time before. We had identified them. We had made announcements for measures, and this all started in 2018. So forward-looking is what we do. We're forward lookers, and this is what we can do so that we're not powerless. Now, back to the Middle East, which is very important for Ehud, Olmert, and Nasser Al-Kidwa. Maybe tell me if I'm too long. What have we failed? How have we failed in the Middle East? Well, we were the Cassandras, as I said. We've kept on saying that if a two-state solution cannot be rolled out, the best second choice would be that the region would explode. We were also the Sisyphus. Look at this that I've brought. Look at all diplomatic efforts in the Middle East on the Israeli-Palestinian, the search for peace in the Arab-Israeli conflict. These are all the texts that were produced on the conflict for the past 80 years. 80 years. And it really shows that this is a conflict for which diplomacy failed. We couldn't find a lasting solution. Yet diplomats have always continued with their efforts. I have the impression that over the past 10 years, these efforts have been forgotten or were not perhaps at the heart of our discussions. And this was the case because some thought that peace was impossible. Others thought that, in fact, this was very much a 20th century conflict, and the rights of Palestinians could be written off for the benefit of regional dynamics like normalization of relations between Israel and some Arab countries. On the 7th of October, we saw the terrorist barbarism of the Hamas and the violence that happened afterwards. And this showed that the idea was fallacious. It was wrong. And this mantra that we had in our heads of a two-state solution, this mantra that perhaps looked like an empty shell, a mantra which for the Palestinians and Israelis was like something that was not leading to any reality, was in fact the only tenable solution so as to avoid a new wave of violence in the future and to make sure that we could walk out of the crisis with a political aim which would offer a lasting end to the crisis and an answer to the aspirations of the Israelis and the Palestinians for their future. This is why, from France, we've asked for a ceasefire. This is why we've asked for the liberation of the hostages. This is why we've asked for a ceasefire to preserve the Gazans in Gaza. And that's why today we're working to support the Arab plan that's been announced from Cairo to offer a credible framework to a ceasefire in Gaza, but also within the framework of future conference that will hold with Saudi Arabia on peace prospects, so that we can try and imagine what this political solution could be. And I think what Ehud and Nasser will tell you is part of that plan. Wajdi, as you were saying in your lecture this morning, you were talking about storytelling or narration or what writing means, and the writers are a rare breed. They can produce new worlds, you were saying, and today we need to make a special effort when we use our imagination so that we can find a solution to these traumas that were reactivated, that were born from the very last year of conflicts that we've seen. Today, these two populations are really far away from thinking about possible peace or coexistence, and yet it is the only solution that we're thinking of for the future, and therefore we should be able to conjure it up and think about it and convince others that the solution is possible. And I suppose this is the message conveyed by Nasser and Ehud. This is their message, and today they are the only ones who can do this. They are the only ones to do this publicly, to air this project that is a two-state solution.
Mr. Olmert.
Professor Wajdi, and Claire, my friend Dr. Nasser Al-Kidwa, distinguished guests. I'm honored and delighted to have this opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts and perceptions and desires and aspirations for our region. But I can't entirely escape the introduction talking about diplomacy, the role of diplomacy, and particularly diplomacy which is now practiced, seems to be widely in the world. And I ask myself, what precisely is this new diplomacy that we're talking about? Is the new diplomacy is a series of statements on a one-sided basis to give orders to the entire universe of what to do, what not to do, and what will happen if the addressee will not respond to these orders. Is the new diplomacy is the kind of the friendly, mutually supportive meeting that took place recently in the Oval Office between two presidents, which was so supportive and so friendly that I'm not talking about the President of Ukraine and the President of America. Before that, there was another meeting of two presidents, which was also somewhat different from the kind of diplomatic meetings that we were familiar with. Then came the other meeting with the President of Ukraine, which was extraordinary, but which characterizes more or less the new style of diplomacy that we are talking about. Is this kind of diplomacy going to be more productive than the old style that we were accustomed to, or is it going to be destabilizing and very dangerous and threatening to shake the foundations of the world order, which we are trying somehow to improve, but not to destroy? So all these are very serious questions, some of which will probably be understood much better in the next few months, and I think it will require an enormous degree of sensitivity, of care, and of patience on behalf of many of us in order to try and keep things moving more or less in a restrained manner towards the possible achievement of some of the goals that we are all committed to achieve. I come from a region which has been devastated over the last 2 years, since October 7th. What happened in October 7th is unforgettable and unforgivable, and it will forever remain in the hearts, in the minds, in the psyche of the Israeli people, and I guess many people across the world, as a terrible manifestation of brutality and of hatred and of savagery that can't be allowed to exist. The counteroffensive of Israel was inevitable. It was recognized and even supported by most of the leaders of the Western world, starting with the American president, but also with President Macron, with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, with the Chancellor of Germany, and almost everyone certainly in the Western world. However, I thought, and I said, and I wrote, I think more than a year ago, that at that time the war should have stopped. The war should have stopped. The Israeli hostages should have been brought back, all of them. The Palestinian prisoners should have been released within the context of an agreement that will have to be worked out, and that we will have to move forward to try and, you all hear me? You know, I've been in politics more than 50 years. Most of the time in almost center stage of Israeli politics, national politics in Israel, which is a very noisy system. And never was I accused that I am not heard. What people accuse me sometimes is that I talk too much and I talk too loud, and I should reduce the volume of my voice. But anyway, I thought that we have to try and think of what lies ahead, what should be the day after, what is the vision for Gaza, for Israel, for Palestinians. How do we work out something that we would be able to say afterwards that this was the last major violent confrontation between Israel and the Palestinians? And regrettably, it took a long time, and there was no voice coming from any one of the participants. Primarily, I have to say, because I'm an Israeli, not from the Israeli government, but equally not from the Palestine. I never heard anything other than the voices of rage and hatred and devastation, which were natural considering the events as they unfolded, and the suffering of many innocent people in all sides. But as an Israeli, I kept saying all the time, while we have to reach out for the leaders of Hamas, while we have to do every possible effort to get rid of Hamas as a fighting force and a prerequisite for any positive development vis-à-vis Gaza and vis-à-vis the entire Middle East, at the same time we can't ignore the huge, enormous suffering of innocent people in Gaza, which were not involved in terror. And I definitely, throughout, never accepted the statement that was made by some. All of the Gazans are terrorists, all of the Gazans are Hamas, all of the Gazans want to kill us. No, it's not true. It's hugely, grossly exaggerated. There are Hamas people in Gaza. Most of the people in Gaza are not Hamas, are not murderers, are not terrorists. And this is something which needs to be elaborated within the State of Israel as part of the political debate, because the easiest way to resort to an extreme attitude to the other side is to accept the basic notion that all of them hate us, that all of them are murderers, that all of them are Hamas, and if so, then why not kill all of them? No. Unfortunately, not until July of 24, there was a first voice coming from both sides together, which said there is an alternative. And this is what I think is the significance of what Dr. Nasser Al-Kidwa and myself were doing from the 17th of July 2024, when we first presented our proposal for the end of the war in Gaza, and then for the beginning of a dialogue towards a comprehensive peace solution between Israel and the Palestinians. As was explicitly said in our joint statement, the ideas about the comprehensive peace were largely, that we published together, were largely based on what I presented to the Palestinian president, Dr. Mahmoud Abbas, in 2008. Truly, I have to say, and this is the greatest disappointment of my life, that had Abu Mazen had the courage, the vision, the determination, the leadership, at that time, the lives of millions of people across the Middle East, and perhaps even much just further than the Middle East, could have been different. Because everything that could be the basis of a comprehensive solution between Israel and Palestine was there. A two-state solution, based, a Palestinian state based on the 67 borders, territorial solution which was far-reaching, farther than anything that was ever proposed in the past, and a changed status of Jerusalem so that it was first time that it was explicitly and publicly and officially presented by the Israeli side that there was a part of Jerusalem which was, should be, had to be, the capital of Palestine, and of course the other part is and will ever be the capital of the State of Israel. But also the changed status of the old city of Jerusalem, which was, according to my original plan, but also according to our joint statement, is going not to have any exclusive political sovereignty, neither by Israel nor by the Palestinians. It will be governed by a trust of 5 nations, of which Palestine and Israel will be a part, and which will be administered according to a framework that will be defined and resolved by the UN Security Council, so that there will not be one exclusive flag over the most sensitive place on earth, which is the Temple Mount. Not Israeli and not Palestinians. There will never be peace between Israel and the Palestinians if there will be an Israeli flag alone on the Temple Mount. There will never be peace between Israel and the Palestinians if there will ever be one Palestinian flag on the Temple Mount. None. Open for all believers. Free access to all the holy sites. Administered by 5 nations which are part of the scene in the Middle East, but also of the international community, and supervised by the United Nations Security Council. There are many others. Our proposal is not a comprehensive peace plan that was meticulously elaborated, every single aspect of it. There are many other issues. What will be with the settlements that are not outside the area which will be annexed into the State of Israel? The 4.4% of the West Bank will be, according to our plan, will be annexed to Israel, and equal-sized territory from what was Israel prior to '67 will be swapped to the Palestinian state, or the Palestinian state will be based identically in terms of size on the 67 borders. And so in the 4.1%, most of the Israeli settlers that live outside the Green Line will be part of the State of Israel without a need to move them. There will have to be a need to relocate, potentially, 18%. There are all kinds of ideas I don't want to elaborate at this moment how to deal with it. But it is practical, it is possible, it is doable, and this is not something that we have to raise our hands and say, no, we have crossed the line wherefrom it is impossible to implement the idea of two states. And also the issue of course, the Arab refugees, and also refugees which were uprooted from where they used to live as a result of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, which are not only Palestinians, also Jews in Arab countries that were forced out of where they used to live generations because of the conflict and the hostilities and the violence between Israel and the Palestinians. This is the first time that something of this depth and aspiration was voiced out in the course of the last 2 very bloody and painful years. Now, everyone says, you know, you guys are naive. How can you even expect that something of this nature will take place, considering what happened in the last few years in the Middle East? Now, you know, when I argue with many everywhere, you know, we have traveled the world over the last 8 months in Europe and other Arab countries. I keep saying, look, had someone said in Europe after 1945 that after 40 years, the Europe which was filled with bloodshed on all sides, which was characterized by the deepest hatred of Germans to French, French to Germans, Germans to British, British to Germans, and all the other countries, that they will be united, not forgetting what happened in the past, but moving forward towards something of entirely different nature. I don't know how many people would have believed it, but it happened. I remember, no, I don't remember, I learned, I couldn't remember, that after the Second World War, although I was there already, but that there was a big debate in the American administration of that time, of Truman. Will America include Germany in what turned out to be the Marshall Plan that saved Europe from despair, from the pains of the second and the destruction of the Second World War? And many important Americans kept saying all the time, Germany, after what they did, after all the destruction, the pain, the mass killing of innocent people across Europe, are we going to help rebuild Germany? And the voices that prevailed in America kept saying all the time, at the end of the day, are we going to make accounts about the past, or are we going to look forward towards a different future, and how can we change what happened in the past so that it will not happen in the future? And they helped rebuild Germany, which definitely helped change the atmosphere, the nature of relations, and the progress of the entire Western world. So when I look at it today, I know one thing, and believe me, none of us is naive. Anyway, no one can say about an Israeli who has been 50 years in a certain stage of Israeli politics and have been through almost everything that he could survive alive if he was naive. I'm not. I'm telling you, sooner than later, people will have to ask themselves, what is going to be the next stage? What is going to happen? Assume that we are killing all of the Hamas people, that there will not be left one Hamas person with a gun. They will all disappear. What is Israel going to do with 2.5 million Palestinians in Gaza and 3.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank? Are we going to be occupied forever? Are we going to deny them the rights for self-determination indefinitely? Are we going to allow Israeli settlers to inflict violence and terror against innocent Palestinians forever and we can get away with it? We will have to do something that changes it. Now, there are many ideas, many different ideas. I heard about an idea that 2 million Palestinians from Gaza will be deported. Where to? Doesn't matter. Get rid of them. Okay, in the new style of modern diplomacy, one can say it even if that one seems to be in a very important position, central position in the world diplomacy. But this is not a solution. There are no other solutions. Deportation of Palestinians on the West Bank, whatever. There is only one serious political solution, and this is a two-state solution. A two-state solution which will allow the Palestinians to have their own independent, sovereign state alongside the state of Israel, and a state of Israel which will be recognized, respected by the Palestinian state, and that hopefully towards the future will be able to build up some kind of cooperation that will be useful and fruitful and positive for everyone involved. This is the only possible solution. It is our role at this stage to try and put it at the center of the international context. It is our responsibility. That's how I feel, and we will hear Dr. Al-Kidwa in a minute. We will have to try and force all the international forces that are interested not to escape the only possible way to move forward, even if it requires sometimes debates and pressures and diplomatic actions that ought to be taken towards one of the participants or the other participant or both of them in order to move them to tolerate and accept and reconcile and acquiesce with all the pains involved in making this movement the other, that because this is the only one that can bring, at the end of the day, a new horizon for millions of people that are yearning for it. Thank you.
Dr. Al-Kidwa.
Good morning. Okay, the opposite of what was said by Wajdi Mouawad. Is it okay to speak in English? Obviously, yes. And let me begin by thanking you all for being here and giving us an opportunity to talk about the situation in this prestigious place, Collège de France. And of course, I have to also to thank Professor Wajdi Mouawad and Claire Legendre. And of course, my political partner, Ehud Olmert, with whom we went on this adventure that is absolutely necessary because not only it is implementable, but it's also the only possible solution. Before I talk about our joint proposal, I have to make some comments on what I heard. First, things are linked to each other. You cannot stop the killing without providing a political horizon, without providing a political context. It's not going to happen. And we have seen that. And this is one of the reasons why we not only spoke about Gaza and the necessity to end the war, but also we spoke about the overall political solution. Because you can't do one without the other. Second, international law does not apply to Israel. And I'm very sorry to say that. I spent years at the United Nations learning about international law and became a big believer in international law. But the experience of the last 2 years showed us clearly that does not apply. And nobody cares, frankly. Nobody cares. Let me give you an example. 2 days ago, a proud minister in the Israeli government, Mr. Cohen, I think, announced that he signed a decision to cut all electricity to Gaza Strip. Where is international law? Nobody cares. 2 days before that, all humanitarian assistance was stopped entering Gaza Strip. Where is international law? Nobody cares. Now, Anne-Claire Legendre, and I have to be careful because I think she is among the last few friends we have, said something about Ukraine, which is correct. I personally believe that the European position on Ukraine is correct, and I support it. However, what makes it uncredible is that it immediately disappeared when we moved to another discussion related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Things become totally different. Totally different. It can't work this way. What this Israeli government has done is precisely the undermining, if not the destruction, of the rule-based world. It's being done unless we stand up and say enough is enough. We need to save not only you, the Israelis, not only the Palestinians, but we need to save us. We need to save the rules. We need to save international law that does not exist. Maybe all this was one of the reasons why we, the two, who are old hands, who are very realistic, and who are probably warriors. This gentleman is a real warrior. I am not a real warrior, political warrior probably. But nevertheless, we believe that we need to take initiative ourselves. We need to hold the bulls from the horns. And we need to put ideas that do not constitute a full plan, because we don't have the right to present a full plan, but it does represent a way forward. It's loud scream that what's happening is wrong and we need to change path. We need to have different course. And in this regard, we presented the joint proposal covering 3 main issues. 1, the necessity to stop the war in Gaza and how we do that. And 2, the overall political solution in the form of 2 states, Israel and Palestine, based on 1967 borders, with a swap, agreed upon swap 4.4, which was proposed by Olmert years ago. And 3, the future of Jerusalem as the capital of the 2 states. Things are linked together. But let me speak about the first one. What we presented was similar to what was presented by President Biden in the past and was incorporated in Security Council Resolution 2375. Is it correct, the number? Yeah, okay. Well, I made some of these resolutions, but I don't remember their numbers. So okay, and we said that that means the necessity to end the war, that all hostages have to be released, that the agreed number of Palestinian prisoners have to be released, that we need to build a governmental structure that is organically linked to the Palestinian Authority, and we need to have an Arab security temporary presence. After that, a few months ago, there was a deal reached. And the deal was, positive, in a way positive, because it led to the release of some hostages and some prisoners. And that's very important for the families, for the two peoples. At the same time, it was obvious that there was no agreement on the political aspect. There was an agreement to negotiate, starting the 16th day, the future governance in Gaza, which did not happen. Not surprising, of course. It did not happen. But we said, okay, we support it in general because of the humanitarian aspect. It's good. After that came some genius ideas about forcibly deporting all Gazans from Gaza. Come on, give me a break, for God's sake. It's not acceptable because this is ethnic cleansing. And it is not implementable anyway. It's not implementable. We nevertheless needed to have some bridges because you cannot just, dismiss the strongest person in the world. But after that came the Arab Summit and the initiative, which was good. But let me tell you very frankly, and remember me, it's not enough. It's good starting point. It's good starting point. But it misses very important aspects. For instance, the security consideration, the presence of an Arab temporary security presence. Where is it? There was a call on the Security Council to do that, to establish an international force. Really? How? Who's going to go there? There will be no American boots on the ground. And if there is no American boots on the ground, the friends of the American will not put boots on the ground. Security Council is not going to adopt that because of positions of some permanent members. You know that. More importantly, there is no political dimension after that. Our original idea was you bring the Arab to Gaza in return to some political requirements. Two requirements. One, Israeli withdrawal from Gaza without return. And this is not political only, this is practical. We are talking about a destroyed area. How can you rebuild it if the guy is standing on the border saying yes to the wood, but no to the iron? Come on, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. You can't rebuild Gaza without changing the relationship between Gaza and Israel completely, i.e., Israeli withdrawal without return, no siege. Liberating this territory to allow it to rebuild, to be rebuilt. So it's necessary. This is the first requirement. The second requirement is the political dimension. We have to have a political process leading to the state of Palestine. And if history teaches us anything, at least we need to agree on the end result. Otherwise, we are repeating Oslo. And we can't afford that. We need to agree on the end result from the beginning, even though if we agree on postponing the mutual recognition for a few years, allowing some negotiations to take place. That's fine. But we have to agree on the end result from the beginning. These are the two requirements, and they are not going to happen if we establish an international security force. They are going to happen only if we have some Arab presence. With these two requirements, this Arab presence could tell the Palestinian public that we are coming with big things, and they will be welcome as liberators. They will not be a fighting force, because to move forward, you need two things. You need a clear position by the Arab states, which did not happen in Cairo, in spite of the important step forward. And you need some serious debate among the Palestinian factions, including Hamas, but with the clear aim of getting them out of the political picture. They have to get out. They have to transform into political parties, which means that they have to end the armament, etc., etc., etc. What is happening now, God knows. There is some suddenly American negotiations or debate or whatever you want to call it with Hamas. Is it good news? Frankly, I don't think so. I don't think so. Probably it will lead to something that's not understood, that will even complicate the situation further. That means what? That means we need to stand up and take positions. Our paper is short, 1 page and 1/4, but it's full with ideas, right ideas. And in this regard, we say clearly, there is a need to establish a governmental structure organically linked to the Palestinian Authority. There is a need for a temporary Arab security presence. You go around, month and month and month of destruction and killing and maiming and all kind of suffering, and you come back to the same point. Enough is enough. People have had it. We say in Arabic, haram, what is happening. What is happening to them is enough. We need to change that. We need to stop that. And to stop that, we need to take positions. We need to be frank. We need to say, yes, Gaza has to end, and these are the ideas, but also we need to have an overall political solution, as I said, in the form of 2 states. And finally, Jerusalem, of course, very important, again, that was, frankly, the result of the insistence of Ehud Olmert. And I said, that's fine, because Jerusalem is very important to all believers of the 3 monotheistic religions, obviously. And as such, of course, it's going to be central to any political agreement in the future. And that is why it's part of the joint proposal. But we say also that officials from both sides have to proceed, have to negotiate the other very important issues, including refugees, settlements, settlers, additional security measures, all these things, reaching to the overall plan that can be achieved. But what we did is very important, extremely important, because it takes a position of principle on the main problems, the war in Gaza and the overall political solution, in addition to the future status of Jerusalem. So finally, like it or not, we go right, we go left, we try to be smart. At the end of the day, there is nothing but that. There is nothing but that. You can't have a solution without the 2 states. And you can't have a future without a solution. So, at the end of the day, this is the only possible solution, and hopefully we will see it happening. We are sure that it's going to happen, provided that it gets some support by the public and internationally as well, and this is our hope. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup d'être.
Well, thank you ever so much for being with us. Thank you for these words, side by side. Thank you for what you've said. It's so good to hear that you share something, you have something in common, and you have built something together despite violence. It is something that matters. You said that maybe diplomacy is changing. Well, I listened to you carefully and I thought maybe it's going to be a long process. And the question I'd like to ask you, the three of you, before we listen to you, before you answer the question, before you can react also to what the other speakers said, let me ask you the question. The question is, do you have the impression that the generations of diplomats that follow, that is the young diplomats, do you have the impression that you can pass on this idea that is dear to your hearts, that is the practical ideas, your practical convictions that you have? Do you think that you can pass them on to these new diplomats, the two-state solution and the way to go about it? Do you have the impression that this is something that you can pass on to them? Or do you have the impression that maybe you are from the generation of diplomats who will then be replaced by new ways of doing things that depend very much on elections and parties? I wanted to ask the question because in Europe, as you've seen, there's a sharp increase in extremist groups and they're developing. What would you say about our future, not from the political front, but from the diplomatic point of view? And Claire, would you like perhaps to react to what was said and then perhaps to talk about transmission, to pass on the ideas? Well, thank you, Wajdi. What struck me when I listened to Nasser and Ehud is connected to what you said this morning. Healing is at your feet. This is what they're saying. They're saying that we need to look into the future and look at reality, the reality that will not change, the reality of two peoples living in a limited territory. And therefore, what we need to move to is a two-state solution, which is the only possible solution. And the benefit of such initiative is that it reopens imagination, the possibility of peace. And Nasser was talking about the Arab plan, which was adopted in Cairo several days ago. Well, the plan is not sufficient, as Nasser underscored, but at least it reopens questions such as the reality of peace on the ground and what it means. What about security? How could we define security? We're no longer talking about eradicating Hamas. We know it will never happen. So the question is the relationship between peace that we imagine and the reality on the ground. This is what we have to find again. And there's a role for artists as well in that, I think. I think we need to tell a story, which is what Nasser and Ehud is saying, with their knowledge of the technical aspects. But we have to do things perhaps differently to convince the opinions, the Israelis and the Palestinians, that peace is possible. I think these are words that they've hammered in: possible, feasible, practical, implementable. Words that were hammered in. That's what many Israelis and Palestinians no longer believe in or can't see for them and for their future. So diplomacy for tomorrow will, I suppose, focus on this that you called a stubbornness. You need to be stubborn to do this job, and people who are not afraid of failing, people who, from the failure can develop a new solution. And what was described by Ehud, Olmert and Nasser Al-Kidwa as a plan is based on what we have in this book, is generations and generations of diplomats who tried to find a solution to the conflict and who perhaps have managed. Maybe in the near future, it'll be reflected in a peace plan that will be adopted. I think this really is at the heart of what diplomats do, and I don't think that the new generations would veer away from that, would change this. Yet this arm twisting, this struggle is changing. It's much more transactional, it's much more brutal, and how we relate to reality is much more complicated. And in our profession, we had a long-standing tradition of confidentiality, secrecy, because with that, you can develop new solutions, not in the limelight. And we need things to remain confidential, because when we take such decisions, such as a peace agreement, it takes courage, and it's dangerous, politically speaking. Please mark my words. A prime minister was assassinated from Israel for this very reason. And the fact that today the words that we listen to have no nuance, they polarize our societies, and this makes conflict resolution even more complicated. So what we have to manage and do is to stick to a discourse of nuances, which is necessary, but yet we have to be heard, which is a major challenge for us. We have to find the right balance to explain how complex the world is, and yet bring in all the subtleties to take into account all the interests of all parties. And yet we want to be heard by the masses. Okay, before I hand over to you, when we were in the other room, Professor Al-Kidwa, you told me an anecdote which I thought was very interesting. You said you were with the British Prime Minister, and he said, how come when politicians retire, they're so good and so strong? And I was thinking about this, and the question that came to me is, if it's a one-pager, your plan is, why is it refused or turned down? Why would you say the existing governments refuse your plan, refuse the plan? It's a very direct question I'm asking you, very naively, if I can say. But all that you've described, this plan that's so simple that we come back to all the time, how come? Why do we get this refusal? What are the obstacles on the way? Why cannot it be implemented?
Just a little correction, because it's very important. It wasn't the Prime Minister, it was a former Minister of State, British Minister of State, and it was me who said the comment, not him. How comes, after his statement, how comes that politicians become very good after they retire? Because I wanted to remind him of what he used to say before he retired and become private sector. Secondly, the plan was not rejected by anybody. The plan was not sufficiently supported by enough governments, because for this plan to fly, you need two things. You need the public support, and you need the support of different governments. Generally, it was received very positively in Europe, including by France. But again, this was not sufficient reception. We need to see a little bit more vigor, more determination, and more public support. And hopefully, this is going to happen. Thirdly, to go back to your original question, of course, diplomacy has changed, because the whole world has changed. The world is changing. And what's going to happen, we still don't know. I do hope from the bottom of my heart that Europe will be a force that reckon with. But that has also some requirements, including in the military field, and hopefully, I do hope, in the field of the rules and the insistence to play by the rules. Because this is the way forward to all of us, and it's very important. So yes, diplomacy has changed, but to be honest with you, I don't like to look at what we proposed as part of diplomacy. Because, as I said, For this to succeed, to move forward, it will take the support of the public. So it has nothing to do with diplomacy. It has to do with the public. The public on two sides and the public at large. You, all of us. We need to work on this to ensure that it's happening. And when that happens, we can be sure. My last comment is that while temper is very negative these days, emotions are very high, while we do understand that everybody wants to kill, want to see blood, to take revenge, it's understood. But at the end of the day, this will pass. And we reach the point of some sane thinking. What's the alternative? Did it work? It's not going to work. There are two peoples, and they don't intend to go anywhere. And from that point comes my absolute conviction that this is going to happen, and there is no other solution. Unless, and I want to be very frank with you, in the past, there were Israeli forces that pushed for expansionism, settler colonialism. They built settlements. They brought settlers. After 30 years, 40 years, the conclusion is it didn't work. It didn't work in changing the demographic balance and canceling the national existence of the Palestinian people. Now, and this is my point, there is something even more dangerous. Collective deportation. Collective deportation. And it's becoming almost fine. Okay, people say, no, but nobody is jumping off the seat and saying, are you crazy? This cannot be acceptable. And here comes again our collective duty to prevent something like that. There are forces in Israel who are pushing for deportation as the way to achieve greater Israel and to cancel the existence of the state of Palestine. And that's what we need to prevent, because that's the only thing that would make what we are proposing moot. But it's not going to happen. One of the reasons, by the way, is that the two countries directly concerned, Egypt and Jordan, are adamantly against this. Why? Because of their national interest, not because of Palestinian consideration. They don't want Gazans in Jordan and in Egypt. Gazans, my God, what to do with Gazans? They will destroy the whole thing. So it's not going to happen. But we need also to contribute on making this not only illegal, but illegal and insane and crazy and should be fought by all means. And when this is done, we'll go back to reality and we'll make sure that what we are proposing, what we have proposed, is the only way forward, is the only thing that can be implemented and hopefully shall be implemented. Thank you.
Monsieur Olmert, si vous voulez prendre la parole de la fin, justement.
Well, first of all, I was thinking, I was trying to contemplate while both of you made your very significant comments. What do I understand by the new generation or the young generation? Is Donald Trump at the age close to 80, is the young generation, and Emmanuel Macron at the age below 50 is the old generation? I mean, let's face it. I think that the distinction should not be on the basis of age. The distinction should be on a different parameters. Simplistic generation and thoughtful generation. Dogmatic generation and open-minded generation. In the event that we take these criteria as a basis of distinguishing between the generations, then maybe the old generation, the new generation are certainly apart, but in a different way, okay? And I personally think, and I regret and I apologize in advance if I hurt anyone, I like the more thoughtful and a more open-minded generation, even if he is below 50. Now, I want to make maybe two comments. Number one, as you may have felt, there are somewhat not entirely total overlap between my sensitivities and Dr. Al-Kidwa sensitivities. Obviously for good reasons that are completely understandable, Dr. Al-Kidwa much more sensitive to what appears to him to be the violations of international law by Israel. And I may be a little bit more sensitive to what appears to me to be the total lack of understanding of what international law is altogether, and the total, almost unstoppable terrorist, fundamentalist, religious, cannibalistic attitude by the Palestinian terrorist organizations over the years against the state of Israel. So we don't, our sensitivities may be somewhat different on certain parts of it, but that does not mean that on the bottom line, where the substance, where the core of the possible solution lies, we are at the same spot. And by the way, we, largely because of him, okay, we were smart enough to avoid dwelling on what may be the different points of attitude by both of us, in order to focus on what should be the basis of what we propose together. And if this strategy and this attitude will be adopted by the parties involved, it may become a little bit easier to reach an altogether a comprehensive solution. One must understand something. In the final analysis, when we will come to the point where we have to agree on a solution, there ought to be enormous pains on two sides to do it. I can tell you, as someone who was at that point, when I sat in front of the President of the Palestinian Authority, as Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and I proposed to him, which I did, and it has never been denied by anyone, that we will practically divide the city of Jerusalem, something that is going against, not, first of all, against my own rhetoric years before, when I was a younger political person in Israel, but which is, on these days even still, is opposed to the common rhetoric of most of the Israeli speakers. It was heartbreaking. It was enormously difficult. It wasn't easy, just, like that. I felt all the weight of thousands of years of Jewish history lying on my shoulders when I said, first time as the leader of the State of Israel, and in that respect also of the Jewish people, yes, Jerusalem has to be shared by Israel and by Palestine as the only possible key to a comprehensive political solution that will change history for both of us. The same will have to be for the Palestinians, for whoever will be in charge of moving forward, of proposing that course of action towards a solution on the Palestinian side. He will have to be able to bear and to tolerate the pains of his compromise, the pains of the possible rejection by segments of the public opinion of his people. It is easy to propose things which are widely accepted by your community and by the other community, for the other side. But this is not the way that you are going to resolve historical issues. This was not the way which, over the years, we were dealt with. And to this, in this context, from my side, I look with great admiration at the compromises which were made by Menachem Begin when he was Prime Minister of Israel in 1977, 78, 79, when he entered negotiations with Anwar Sadat, claiming that all of Sinai will be part of the State of Israel and all of the West Bank will be integrated into the State of Israel, and he ended them by pulling out entirely from Sinai to the last centimeter. And he won the prize of history because he changed everything for us and for them and for the entire Middle East. So, and I look at Rabin, the late Prime Minister Rabin, who was assassinated for making the Oslo agreements which were opposite to everything that he was practicing all his life. Because at the time, when the time has come for taking an historical decision, the future was stronger than the memories. And that was great leadership. And I can go on. And what I believe in is that leadership is measured, at the end of the day, by the ability to do, when the time comes, perhaps the opposite of everything that the leader has preached for and fought for all his life, if what he does now is the right thing, even though if it doesn't, is not compatible with everything that he said in the past, because he prefers the future over history. And this is something that whoever will have to sit at the table of negotiations will have to do. And finally, I want to say this. Now, how do you do diplomacy? You know, all these are words. At the end of the day, I think the leadership is also measured by the ability to cut through, throw to the sidelines the rhetoric, the slogans, the simplistic statements, the obsessions which have governed the politics of his side, you know, vis-a-vis the other side, and cut through to the heart of the issue. And if we will be blessed with people of this ability, I think that peace is much closer than most people think we are. Because, look, what we have proposed, you know, as Dr. Al-Kidwa frequently uses this word, he says, we didn't invent the wheel. I proposed a two-state solution on the basis of 67 in 2008. There were so many that supported it on the other side as well, and said it, and had the courage to stand for it. Not the leaders, unfortunately. But the two-state solution is there for a long time. A compromise is there. They force the need for Israel to pull out from 95, 96%, 95% and a half of the territories is well known and well articulated over so many different conferences and meetings and diplomatic efforts and so on and so forth. What is required now is the courage and the vision and the strength to cut through the rhetoric and go to the bottom line and say, that's what we do. And we will not rest until we force the international forces to move forward in order to achieve it. Thank you.
Merci infiniment à vous trois parce que...
Many thanks to the three of you, because it's really important for everybody. What have I done now? What have I done? Oh, sorry, I have to speak in the mic. As I said, I wanted to thank our three panelists, because hearing you speak together makes us realize that it's possible to have the same dream, even though there are disagreements and different points of view, but moving towards the same target. It can become a reality. It's really, really important, and I want to thank you so much for that. And all this is very much connected to writing and to the duties of artists today, you know, to look at the world and also to tell the stories of people. How can you remain human when the situation is not? That's also what the cinema is about, what novels are all about. So for this, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Anne-Claire, because it's also thanks to you that I could get in touch with our two friends. So thank you for being the go-between here. And I want to tell you that next week we are going to continue this cycle of lectures on writing, and we will be looking at a new verb, which is the verb to meet. Well, actually, it has started today, and thank you very much for coming.